Hurricane Wilma began as a relatively small weather disturbance in the Caribbean Sea in October 2005, but what started as a cluster of thunderstorms would quickly evolve into one of the most intense hurricanes ever recorded in the Atlantic. The storm first formed as a tropical depression on October 15, 2005, southeast of Jamaica, where warm sea surface temperatures and favorable atmospheric conditions fueled its rapid development. Over the next few days, Wilma strengthened into a tropical storm, and by October 18th, it had reached hurricane status. The storm's intensification was nothing short of astonishing. Meteorologists closely monitored Wilma as it rapidly intensified into a Category 5 hurricane within just 24 hours, a phenomenon that stunned experts. By October 19th, Wilma's central pressure plummeted to 882 millibars, making it the most intense hurricane ever recorded in the Atlantic Basin at that time. With sustained winds of 185 miles per hour, the storm's eye wall became tightly organized, and its eye shrank to just 2 miles in diameter, creating a pinhole eye that is characteristic of the most intense hurricanes. As Wilma reached its peak intensity, it became clear that the storm was a force of nature unlike anything seen before. The hurricane's path remained unpredictable at first, as it meandered slowly over the Caribbean Sea. This created widespread uncertainty for residents across the region, who anxiously waited to see where the storm would strike next. While some hoped the storm would weaken before making landfall, Wilma's sheer strength made it one of the most threatening hurricanes of the 2005 season, a year that was already notorious for deadly storms like Katrina and Rita. After days of uncertainty, Hurricane Wilma began to move northwest, setting its sights on Mexico's Yucatán Peninsula as the storm approached. Officials in the region issued urgent warnings for residents to evacuate, especially in the popular tourist destinations of Cancun, Cozumel, and Playa del Carmen. Despite these warnings, many locals and tourists found themselves trapped as the storm arrived sooner than expected. On October 21st, Wilma made its first devastating landfall as a Category 4 hurricane near Cozumel. The Yucatán Peninsula bore the brunt of Wilma's fury for over 48 hours, as the storm stalled over the region, moving at an agonizingly slow pace. This prolonged the destruction as the hurricane's powerful winds and torrential rains battered the area. Winds of over 150 miles per hour uprooted trees, destroyed buildings, and left entire neighborhoods submerged in floodwaters. The storm surge along the coast swallowed beaches and inundated coastal properties, leaving behind a trail of devastation that would take months, if not years, to repair. In Cancun, the once bustling hotel zone was reduced to a wasteland of shattered glass, debris, and ruined infrastructure. The iconic beaches that attracted millions of tourists each year were eroded, and many hotels were forced to close indefinitely. Inland areas were also not spared, as Wilma's heavy rainfall led to widespread flooding, cutting off communities and causing rivers to overflow. Residents were left without power or clean drinking water for days, and rescue operations were hampered by the widespread destruction. The death toll in Mexico, though relatively low compared to other major hurricanes, was a testament to the storm's immense power and the swift response from local authorities who managed to evacuate many residents before the worst of the storm hit. After wreaking havoc on the Yucatán Peninsula, Hurricane Wilma finally began to move northward across the Gulf of Mexico, but the storm was far from over. As it moved over the warm waters of the Gulf, Wilma began to reorganize, regaining strength after weakening slightly during its prolonged stay over land. Meteorologists closely tracked the storm's progress, noting that it could potentially intensify again before making a second landfall in the United States. By October 23rd, Wilma had regained Category 3 status, with maximum sustained winds of around 115 miles per hour, making it a formidable threat to the U.S. Gulf Coast. Forecasters predicted that the storm would take aim at Florida, particularly the southern part of the state, where residents were already preparing for the worst. Mandatory evacuation orders were issued for low-lying coastal areas, and millions of people scrambled to secure their homes, stock up on supplies, or leave the state entirely. Florida was no stranger to hurricanes, but the sheer unpredictability of Wilma's path, combined with the fact that the 2005 hurricane season had already been so deadly, left many residents feeling anxious and uncertain about what was to come. As Wilma approached, Florida Governor Jeb Bush urged residents to take the storm seriously, emphasizing the potential for significant damage. By October 24th, Wilma made its second landfall near Cape Romano, Florida, as a Category 3 hurricane. The storm tore through the southern part of the state, bringing with it destructive winds, heavy rainfall, and a dangerous storm surge. Even though the hurricane's intensity had decreased slightly, it still caused widespread damage across Florida, especially in densely populated areas like Naples, Fort Lauderdale, and Miami. Hurricane Wilma's impact on Florida was both swift and severe. As the storm made its way across the state, it brought down power lines, uprooted trees, and damaged thousands of homes and businesses. Winds of up to 120 miles per hour ripped off roofs, shattered windows, and left entire communities without power for weeks. In the Miami metropolitan area, high-rise buildings were particularly vulnerable, with many experiencing broken windows and structural damage. Streets were littered with debris, making travel nearly impossible in the immediate aftermath of the storm. One of the most significant challenges in the wake of Wilma was the widespread power outages. Over 6 million people were left without electricity, and many regions struggled to restore power for weeks after the storm had passed. In some areas, residents faced long lines at gas stations, grocery stores, and supply centers as they tried to gather the resources they needed to survive. The damage to infrastructure was immense, with roads washed out, bridges damaged, and water systems disrupted. Hospitals and emergency services were overwhelmed, particularly in South Florida, where the storm had hit the hardest. Despite the destruction, Florida's residents showed resilience in the face of disaster. Neighbors helped each other clear debris, and local authorities worked tirelessly to restore order and get essential services back up and running. However, the financial toll was staggering, with early estimates suggesting that Wilma caused billions of dollars in damage. For many Floridians, the storm's aftermath was a long and difficult recovery process, with some areas taking years to fully rebuild. In the days and weeks following Hurricane Wilma, the focus shifted to recovery and rebuilding. Federal, state, and local agencies, along with volunteers from across the country, worked to provide aid to the hardest-hit areas. The Federal Emergency Management Agency, FEMA, played a significant role in coordinating disaster relief efforts, providing temporary housing, food, and financial assistance to those affected by the storm. However, the scale of the damage meant that recovery was slow and uneven, with some communities, particularly in rural areas, struggling to access the help they needed. The agricultural sector in Florida was particularly hard hit by Wilma, with citrus groves and sugarcane fields experiencing extensive damage. This had a ripple effect on the state's economy, as the agricultural industry was a major contributor to Florida's overall financial health. Farmers faced months of uncertainty as they worked to salvage what they could from their crops and rebuild their livelihoods. Wilma also had a lasting impact on hurricane preparedness in the United States. The storm served as a stark reminder of the importance of early evacuation orders and the need for more robust infrastructure capable of withstanding such powerful storms. In the years following Wilma, Florida and other hurricane-prone states invested heavily in improving their emergency response systems, reinforcing buildings and educating the public about hurricane safety. As part of the historic 2005 hurricane season, which also included the infamous Hurricane Katrina, Wilma is remembered as one of the most intense and destructive storms to ever hit the Atlantic. Its legacy endures not only in the physical scars left on the regions it struck, but also in the collective memory of those who lived through it. For many, the experience of Hurricane Wilma was a sobering reminder of nature's destructive power and the importance of preparedness in the face of such deadly storms.